Hello, dear colleagues. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Enric Noguera, a Plant-Based Treaty City Campaigner for Europe. Plant-Based Treaty is hosting this joint press conference with the Global Young Greens to discuss the principle of polluter pays, highlight the role of youth engagement within the climate discussion, and to talk about the need to phase out fossil fuels and a transition to a Paris-aligned food system. The Plant-Based Treaty is here at COP29 to urge world leaders to add a global plant-based treaty to the UN Climate Paris Agreement to address 1/3 of the emissions from the food systems. Also here today, all the way at the right, we have Janmejai Tiwari. This is Secretary General from the Global Young Greens, a growing global organization supporting and consolidating the efforts of young people working towards social justice, ecological sustainability, grassroots democracy, and peace. The Global Young Greens is a joint project of over 90 youth organizations and hundreds of individuals. We are also joined by a special guest, Lena Schilling. She is an Austrian climate activist and the youngest member of the European Parliament. She fights for climate and environmental justice, nature conservation, and a socially just transport sector. She is well known for her work with Fridays for Future and also as co-founder of the Austrian Youth Council. I'll now pass it on to our first speaker, Stephen George. He has built a professional career in Earth observation and has expanded his role to include work as an independent researcher, writer, speaker, and climate justice activist. He is here this year in Baku as an independent advocate to bring attention to the discourse on food systems and the new paradigm on Earth system governance. Whenever you want.
Wonderful, thank you. And it is an absolute pleasure and privilege to sit and speak alongside such esteemed panelists. So first of all, I would like to bring attention to the significance of the food system. Now, while the phase out of fossil fuels is absolutely necessary and rightfully receives attention, it's equally important to understand that the reason we are given a carbon budget for net zero by 2050, and thus this orderly phase out of fossil fuels, is because the IPCC climate models have assumed that there will be a transformation of agriculture, forestry, and other land use from carbon source to a carbon sink in the next 25 years, with a net zero by 2030. Moreover, we also know that even if we halted fossil fuels today, emissions from our food system alone would push us beyond the 1.5 and 2 degrees Paris Agreement targets. Not only this, but as we appropriate land for agriculture, we destroy habitats and biodiversity. We replace these rich, complex ecosystems with grazed land, pastures, and monocultures. When we over-apply nitrogen and phosphorus, we create anoxic events in rivers and oceans, all of which erode and undermine the resilience of ecosystems and their functioning that has taken centuries to establish. Things like carbon sequestration, evapotranspiration, water cycling and purification, and nutrient transport, all of these are key pillars of biosphere integrity that we all collectively depend on. Now, these transgressions of our planetary boundaries are driven by the food system, particularly animal agriculture. So there is no stable future for the Earth system if we continue these destructive practices. Now, I want to also take this opportunity to address another blind spot in our advocacy. While we remain preoccupied in our carbon tunnel vision, there is an immediate governance challenge to prevent the transgression of tipping thresholds in the Earth system. Once we trigger feedback mechanisms, we initiate these irreversible processes that lead to regime shifts, from ice to no ice, from carbon sink to carbon source, from forests to savannas. These are points of no return, and once crossed, they cannot be reversed on human timescales. We currently cannot rule out that tipping thresholds in the Greenland ice sheet and the West Antarctic ice sheet may have already been breached, along with a very high risk that many others will be breached at the 1.5 degrees mark. So this 1.5 is a physical limit of our planet. It is not a political target. This means that we must all care about our ice sheets, our oceanic circulations, the Amazon rainforest, because they underscore a shared reality, that our collective well-being relies on the governance of these planetary commons that maintain the stability, the resilience, and the life support functions of the Earth system. Now, of course, this urgency of the situation cannot be overstated, and this demands a great deal from all of us, as it introduces a new paradigm of Earth system stewardship that calls for this radical reassessment of how we understand and structure our economic, political, technological, and social systems, with this understanding that people and nature are entwined within social ecological systems. In these challenging times, each of us confronts choices that define not just our actions, but our very purpose. So let's rise to meet these responsibilities, and as we do, I urge each of you to consider not just who you are, but who you are called upon to be in this time of need. And so this leads me on to my next message I wanted to get across. What is the planetary crisis, if not a social challenge? So the reality of the situation is, our generation, I'm a millennial, I'm 30 years old, and the generations that follow currently do not have any political or institutional power to change anything. And we are rapidly depleting our 1.5 carbon budget, with only 2 to 4 years remaining under current emission scenarios. By the time we are old enough to lead, we will inherit an Earth system that has lost its stability, its resilience, its life support functions that have defined the last 12,000 years of the Holocene. What are we supposed to do with this legacy? I struggle to fully express the intergenerational injustice of this situation. So the decisions that we are making this very decade will shape our futures. They will shape the behavior of the Earth system for the next thousands of years. Now, I just wanted to take the moment to remind us all that a better world isn't simply handed to us because we desire it or because we are given a platform at conferences like COP. A better world is fought for. It is struggled for. We stand on the shoulders of giants, on the sacrifices and the struggles of pivotal historical movements, from the fight against segregation and for the emancipation of black people, to the suffrage of women, to labor movements, civil rights advancements, indigenous resistance, many environmental campaigns. Each of these movements have shaped the course of history, empowering us to continue their legacy of change and justice. It is our privilege to know and our duty to continue the fight for collective liberation, for the same systems of injustice and oppression accelerate the destabilization of the Earth system that affects us all. This means the freedom of all groups, recognizing that oppression is intersectional and all our oppressions are tied together. The liberation of any one group is bound to the liberation of all others. Now, this is a powerful lens to advocate and build campaigns through because, rather than addressing issues in isolation, we are able to focus on dismantling the systems and structures that perpetuate the injustice. It emphasizes on the importance of solidarity and mutual support among diverse movements for social and climate justice, recognizing that none are free until all are free. And so for young people like me, for like those on this panel, in the audience, for those watching at home, I have no doubt that you also oscillate between hope and despair every single day. We put every waking minute, every part of our being into the struggle for justice so that we can have a livable future for ourselves, our children, our grandchildren, and we are at constant risk of burnout. We need some hope. We need some inspiration, a vision, something to grasp onto to sustain us in this ongoing fight. But we have to forge that for ourselves, for we cannot and will not find it in our global leaders. We have skin in the game, they don't. And so through this intersectional lens, we need to build a stronger, resilient people movement to counter the rising tide of populism and this rhetoric of hate, marginalization, and individualism, one that unifies us all, a movement that lets us learn how to talk to each other, to listen to each other, to be heard by each other, to build relational literacy, to nurture intrinsic values, and then act from a foundation of radical empathy, so that when we fall into community, we fall into compassion, not into despair and indifference. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and also thank you for inviting me. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm very happy to speak here today, because it's, as we all know, a conference about climate finance. But this is not just about numbers. We are negotiating our future. We are negotiating for justice or injustice. And I think we need to keep that in mind when we're speaking about these technical things, because it's really about our future and what we are fighting for. And yes, we see with the planetary boundaries and the situation, the climate crisis is escalating. We already created a new reality. We are speaking about the climate crisis longer than I am alive. And still, we are not there yet, not even close. We are reaching the tipping point. We are reaching the effects of the crisis already, and we are facing the floods, the droughts, and the wildfires. That's nothing that's in the future, ladies and gentlemen, that happens right now, and also here and all across the world. It's not a question we can just speak about next year, in 3 years, in 10 years. Ladies and gentlemen, it will be too late. So yes, this conference is a very important space. It's important for all the young people searching after hope, and also an important space for global leaders to show how to lead. And that's what I'm demanding. So what we are talking about today and the other days so far is about, do we have enough money? Where do we get the money from? And there are a lot of numbers floating around. I think we have to ask another question. You mentioned it's about justice. It's about social justice, it's about global justice, it's about generational justice. And the question is, who will pay for it? Yes, we see big oil and gas companies are making about 4 trillion profit a year. And then we are asking us, where is the money? I think when we are committed, politically committed, we can say polluters have to pay. And I make it that simple because I think in the end, it's a question about dignity and dignity for humanity. And I think that's what we need to face right now. And also, we're talking a lot about mitigation. So of course, we have to phase out fossil fuels and stop fossil subsidies right now. I think it's ridiculous to still do it. And in the end, I think I want to end on a hopeful note. There is still a world to win. And even if we are frustrated and sometimes tired and asking ourselves, will it be enough? Then we will still keep fighting. Because if we're giving up now, we're giving up on a world. And I think there is so much to achieve still. So yes, in these negotiations, we need much more empathy and also much more feeling for what we are facing right now. And thank you so much for this space and having the opportunity to share this perspective with you. I think that's very important.
Thank you, Lena, for sharing, and thanks to the Plant-Based Treaty. Thanks to everyone for having us and having this joint press conference. We, as Global Young Greens, stand united in a call for an urgent, equitable, and transferable climate action. We, as an organization who supports the Global South and who have been pushing for the voices from the Global South, have been somewhat disappointed by these big climate conferences, which have not given much space to the Global South, specifically the young activists, young marginalized people, the gender, the LGBTQI community, who are not being able to be here because of the exclusive nature of these big climate conferences. And we come across from the globe to demand bold actions from the world leaders, which we have not been seeing now in this COP, in the negotiations that are happening in the plenary rooms, the negotiations that are happening, or the bilaterals that are taking place without the youth having an actual say at the table, without they're deciding for our future without having us on the table. And by us, I mean the people who are most affected are not doesn't have the right seat at the table. We, as Global Young Greens, we do demand a fair, fast, forever phase out of fossil fuels. Nation states must commit to a comprehensive, just, and equitable phase out of fossil fuels. We, as Global Young Greens, demand the meaningful inclusion of youth at the NDCs and at the decision-making tables. The countries, the nations also have to make sure, while making their NDCs more ambitious, they have youth in their decision-making process, they have the marginalized communities in their decision-making process, and the NDCs are being made as per the demands of the youth, because it's their future. And then we also call on the nations who are discussing at COP as well that young people are at the forefront of the climate crisis, and it's high time we give them the seat at the table as well. And the other demand is for the accountability of the big polluters. The mechanism must be established to hold corporations and states accountable for their contributions to climate crisis. And funds from these mechanisms must be directed towards adaptation, resilience, loss and damage, and vulnerable communities, particularly in the Global South. And it's high time the Global North has to take the responsibility for the historic pollutions that they have made and the reparations that the Global South need. And we do need ambitious goals from them. We are still, as Lena, you were mentioning about the numbers flying around the negotiation tables, it's 200 billion, it's 600 billion, but we do not need billions, we do need millions. And it's the time for the Global North to take the responsibility. It's time for the big polluters, not just the states, but also the corporations, to be accountable and to pay the money. The money is there. We are now hearing more jargons about where would the money come from. As it was rightly mentioned before as well, there is money which the oil companies, everyone, the fossil fuel are making, but we are not getting money for the public finance. And at last, from the Global Young Greens, I would say the indigenous people, the marginalized communities throughout this process has to be involved. There has to be a proper representation. And youth is no more the future. We are the present. And we don't take, I would also like to end on a very positive note, although most of the people that I'm speaking to as youth are almost saying that this COP is already lost, we are not getting anything. But we as youth, we will stand up, we will fight for our space, and we'll make sure that we are there to make the change. Thank you.
And lastly, we would like to talk about the challenge that feeding the world while meeting everyone's needs represents. We need to stay within the safe operating space of our planetary boundaries, which is critical to climate action. Food systems account for 1/3 of greenhouse emissions, and food emissions on their own would be enough to bridge the 1.5 degrees target. Therefore, we need action on food and fossil fuels in equal measure and determination. 34 cities across the world have endorsed the call for a global plant-based treaty to align the food systems with the Paris Agreement and to implement best practices in plant-based food policy at the local level. Cities that have already endorsed that call include Los Angeles, West Hollywood, Jabalpur, Sonipat, Than, Mandwar, Amsterdam, Edinburgh, and Belfast. Along with these cities, the call for a treaty is edging close to 250,000 individuals, along with 3,500 groups and businesses, cultural leaders, including Sir Paul McCartney, and over 100 scientists, including 5 Nobel Prize winners and several IPCC authors and reviewers. The plant-based treaty proposes 3 core principles: redirect, relinquish, and restore, along with 40 suggested proposals. The treaty would redirect resources from animal-based to plant-based food systems, a big transition like our switch to electric vehicles. As this increasingly yields new, affordable, and healthy plant-based food choices, the treaty will be going to relinquish the halt of the expansion of animal agriculture harmful practices and restore the ecological systems that these practices have degraded. Our Plant-Based Treaty in Action report looks at 40 suggested proposals and highlights examples of best practices from around the world already being implemented. For example, within Proposal 12, we look at the introduction of meat and methane taxes with proceeds funding restoration and of land destroyed by animal agriculture. This week, Denmark agreed on how to implement the world's first tax on agriculture emissions, including greenhouse gases from farm animals. This comes after months of negotiations between the country's major parties, farmers, the industry, trade unions, and environmental groups. The concept of methane taxes to lower meat consumption is supported by the International Monetary Fund in their 2022 report, How to Cut Climate Emissions. They say financial incentives to reduce animal farming are practical for wealthier countries, although might be harder to implement for African or Latin American countries. The IMF goes on to propose that in countries with limited capacity for agriculture, strategies might need to focus on farm and consumer level incentives, such as shifting from animal farming to plant-based food systems. Consumer level incentives to shift from meat to plant-based diets and incentives to farmers rather than tax might be more applicable for decarbonizing food systems in these situations. As well as redirecting money directly from animal farming to plant-based solutions, Proposal 15 of the treaty calls for an end to government subsidies advertising for meat, dairy, and the egg industry. 3 cities in the Netherlands, Utrecht, Bloemendaal, and Haarlem, have implemented bans on advertisement for meat, dairy products in public spaces. The ban is part of a broader strategy to encourage more sustainable and environmentally friendly consumption pattern among residents. By curbing the visibility of meat and dairy advertisements, these cities hope to shift public perception and consumption habit towards plant-based alternatives, aligning with their commitments to reduce greenhouse gases and promote public health. Proposal 36 calls for incentivized subsidies, grants for farmers to finance switch from animal agriculture to diversified plant production. Netherlands is another good example where the government has introduced subsidies through its Transition Fund for Agriculture, designed to help farmers shift from traditional animal agriculture to plant-based production systems. This fund provides financial support and grants to farmers interested in diversifying their crops, particularly focusing on sustainable plant-based proteins. By offering these incentives, the Dutch government aims to reduce emissions from animal farming and environmental impact while supporting farmers in transitioning to more climate-friendly agricultural practices. A new study this year has raised the alarm bells on the risk of carbon sink collapse. Forests, plants, and soil absorbed almost no carbon in 2023 during the hottest year on record. While this collapse of land carbon sinks might be temporary, scientists have warned that cracks in the resilience of the Earth systems are beginning to show. We need a global treaty and international cooperation to scale up plant-based solutions. Cities are already showing it can be done. Many are prioritizing plant-based foods and showing us the pathway to a 1.5 aligned food systems. That is why climate action must be scaled up with a fossil fuel treaty and a plant-based treaty. Thank you so much. We will now open the floor for questions if there are any. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Gina, and I'm a student from the US. And right now I'm performing research on the Aim for Climate initiative, which was established during COP29 to increase climate finance for agricultural innovations. And I was wondering about what specific changes need to happen during the remainder of the negotiations today to transition into a Paris Agreement-aligned food system.
Maybe could you still one more time say it a bit louder, because we were not able to hear it properly. I'm sorry.
Yes, sorry about that. Hi, my name is Gina, and I'm a student from the US. And right now I'm performing research on the Aim for Climate initiative that was established during COP26 to increase finance for climate-smart agriculture and agricultural innovations. And I was wondering about what specific changes need to happen during the remainder of the negotiations to transition into a Paris Agreement-aligned food systems.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, so I don't think there is much room in this scope already to include any changes, but I think some of the changes that Denmark is doing, for example, are a great model in terms of financial instruments and how to redirect that public money and private money to solutions to help transition, and especially having a social component. That's what we are advocating, a strong social component to support livelihoods from farmers and from everybody involved in the food sector. So I think those are the general lines that should be included both at the local level, national level, but also within the UN climate negotiations as well.
Sorry, I don't know. I will not speak in English. I can speak in French. Someone who can translate? Because my English is very bad. Ok, je suis Madame Prudence, je viens de la République démocratique du Congo. Ok, je travaille avec les ministres de la Jeunesse. Et j'ai bien suivi les présentations. Malheureusement, je ne sais pas poser de questions en français, mais ma question est celle-ci. Nous venons de voir qu'il y a une injustice dans la prise de décision pour ce qui est de jeunes par rapport à l'accord de Paris ou bien l'alignement dans la transition de l'agriculture ou bien la transition écologique. Mais je voulais demander quelque chose. Est-ce que c'est possible que les jeunes du monde entier se réunissent ensemble pour trouver une décision commune pour permettre à ce que la partie qui est lésée puisse trouver une décision et qu'une fois pour toutes, la jeunesse parle un seul langage? OK.
On peut te répondre après. Et on a fini l'étape, désolé. On peut te répondre à côté.